We're live.
We are live on the Facebook here. Checking some status here. We'll wait till folks pop up and then we'll go from there. 1, 2, 3. Got my night. And that cool fire trainer ready to rock and roll. There's primary camera number 1, 2, and 3. 27 seconds into it. Typically, Facebook is kind of interesting in that all of a sudden a bunch of people on. Like right now, we have 3 people on, 7 people on. Good morning, folks. We are live. If you are jumping on, welcome to, of course, our live stream show this morning. My name is Mike Seeklander. We have 17 people on, and it's so weird. Whenever we go live in this studio, or in the past when I go live, it's like there's a delay for a while, and I would suppose people get the notifications, and then boom, we got like 30 people on, which is exciting because I'm seeing a little 0. Like for me, you can't see my perspective right now, but there's a screen right there. I'm looking at my beautiful face, and I see there are 20 live viewers on this morning. So anyways, let's kick it off this morning. Good morning. Good morning. My name is Mike Seeklander. We're going to be covering defensive handgun, and today is kind of the old school lesson, grip, trigger, sights. So we're going to be talking about all kinds of things that are related to structure, building that perfect shooting structure with 2 hands and 1 hand as well. But before we do that, let's welcome everybody to the show. And by the way, I got a support crew here. And one of the things that I've always thought that, Fox News or CNN or anybody with a great support crew should say thank you to their support crew. My conscious is in the booth there, AKA Charles. Awesome. We got social here, Chris, Mr. Mikey, CEO is here, and Todd for support. Thank you to them for supporting me. By the way, this is the LiveFire studio. If you haven't seen this, if this is the first time you've been watching me live, this is the actual LiveFire studio. We went live here last week and did some test lives before. So this is where I will be doing 99% of my live streaming in the very near future. If you're just jumping on, of course, my name is Mike Seeklander. Click the share button, click the like button. One thing that we realize with Facebook is if you click like or love or hearts or whatever else, please no mean faces. Facebook says, hey, this guy is pretty cool. He's pretty important. So we need to show it to other people. We have 31 people on right now. I know IDPA is in the house. I'm live on the Shooting Performance page, the American Warrior Society page, as well as the IDPA page as well. So here's the deal, folks. Let's get right into it. Before we start talking about guns and gear, as always, I want to remind you, safety is the key. So if you're going to follow along today, if you're going to handle any firearms, please do me a big favor and check and make sure that you are unloaded and clear. And if you're carrying a gun, if you're watching this at work or on the way to the work, that's fine, but please don't handle that firearm unless you clear it safely. All other safety rules apply as well. So if you're going to dry fire, make sure you have a safe backstop and beyond. Watch your trigger finger, watch your muzzle direction, and comply with all safety rules. If you're not willing to comply with all safety rules, please, I have to ask you to leave this live stream and then go watch a basket weaving live stream somewhere else. I'm not sure if that'd be that much fun though. So bottom line is be super safe. Now I have a variety of handguns here on the table. One of my live handguns, SFX9 here, is clear and safe. I'm going to check that chamber. I am good to go there. I've got one of my Wilson Combat customized Glock 19s. This is clear and safe as well. No magazine, nothing in the chamber. And then for the rest of the live stream, I have several demo pistols. One of the things you're going to notice is I have a couple handguns here that have a red and or a red silver type barrel. This particular live stream is sponsored by Coolfire. The Coolfire Trainer is that incredible kit that you can take and replace the barrel and the recoil spring in your handgun. And then when you fill the barrel with compressed CO2 and you pull the trigger, whoa, you get felt recoil. So I'm going to be using the Coolfire Trainer to demonstrate some of the things today because we're talking about grip, trigger, and sights. And when I'm resetting the trigger, there's nothing better than a resetting mechanism that is offered by the Coolfire Trainer. I also have a small compact gun, one of my old M&P Shields. This is an old school gun with a Coolfire Trainer as well. So if you see the red barrels, you know these guns can't be loaded, and I technically can't unload them because they have the Coolfire Trainer barrel inside them. We also have a couple incredible tools called CERT pistols, shot indicating resetting trigger. Maybe a company called Next Level Training, our buddy Mike Hughes out in Washington State. They're great for demonstrating certain aspects of the trigger pull and the grip as well. So if you see me with these red demonstration tools, use my proper instructor terminology, that's what they are as well. So who is on this morning? By the way, we have 45 people live on. Here's my goal. I tell people, as a matter of fact, I shared this on Instagram and on LiveFire the other day. I always like to set a goal. I like to set a weekly goal, a daily goal. For example, I do my shooting programming and my fitness programming on a weekly sheet that says, hey, Mike, here's what you got going on, and here are the things that you're going to do. And my goal for today is to hit 100 live viewers. I have 45 live viewers right now, and I'm going to ask your help. Please help me hit 100 today. I'd be super excited. I know IDPA is in the house right now. They're saying share. Please share this in some of my Facebook groups, in some of your Facebook groups, or wherever else. Send a text message. Tell a friend, hey, you're a brand new shooter. You really need to watch this guy. He's going to be talking about all of the things that are truly important to shooting. Who do we have on this morning? We have, Gilly's on this morning. Good morning. Family Firearm Reviews from Kyle from PA. Good morning, Kyle. How are you? Hey, Will Melton, DDC. How many people know what DDC stands for, by the way? DDC, the original DDC was the Daily Dry Fire Challenge, where I'm alive at 6 a.m. in the morning, 5 days a week. I know, I was crazy back then. Hey, IDPA is in the house as well. John Shriver from Oklahoma. Coin number 1919. By the way, if you're a coin member, please type up your member number. If you're an ACSS member, type it up there. And most importantly, if you are a member of LiveFire, do me a favor, get on the app, follow me, and send me a message, and I will follow you back. We're posting some new stuff. Before I forget, this week's weekly programming went up yesterday. It's a completely different drill. We started off with 3 really cool drills, Bowl 1, Bowl 2, and Bowl 3. This is a different drill. You got to be a LiveFire user to check that out. And if you're not sure what I mean by programming, basically we're going through a series of drills and programming, and every chunk or piece of content that I've been putting out relates directly to the goal for that series of weeks. So for example, this week we're talking about presentation, building a grip and presenting the handgun, and I thought that would be a perfect fit for today for grip trigger sight. So get on LiveFire, go ahead and go through that drill, give me a follow, send me a message, okay? I have my notes here. Let me check out my notes. All right, so folks, we're going to get right into it, and I want to talk to you real briefly about structure. Let's go ahead and use, I'm going to use the Beretta with the Cool Fire Trainer conversion kit. So when we're talking about grip, trigger, and sights, we have to be aware that our structure, everything from the ground up, will allow or facilitate for recoil control, right? So if you look at my structure when I'm shooting a handgun, right? When I'm in a two-handed shooting position, everything that I'm doing is relevant. And I tell my students all the time, you know, we talk about structure, we start from the ground up. I start talking about the feet first, then I talk about the knees, then I talk about the hips, then I talk about the relationship of the hips and the upper body, and then we go down the arms from the shoulders to the elbow to the hands. And in reverse order, the most important part of your structure is the contact point with the gun. But I can't ignore the lower body position, because if the lower body position is not proper, meaning the feet are wider than shoulder width and my balance is such that I could be both stable and mobile, I have messed up something in my structure. So when you're watching this, I want you to consider that I'm not just telling you to stand flat-footed in a good range stance. I'm telling you to build a structure that will facilitate, see me using big words? I love big words. That will facilitate you doing whatever you're doing that moment in time with the firearm, whether you're a defensive shooter or a competitive shooter, it doesn't really matter. And what you're about to do, right? So let's put this in the context of a competitive shooter, because I know there are a bunch of competitive shooters watching. If I am shooting directly at a target with a two-handed stance, my feet might be wider than shoulder width, right? The weight is on the balls of my feet, right? But the weight is pretty even. For me, I'm a right-handed shooter, so my right foot is slightly back. My left foot is slightly forward. That's a normal two-handed balanced stance. But if I had a piece of cover or a wall that I had to shoot around, or maybe for defensive purposes, you're using cover in your home and you're searching, and you have to engage around the corner of that wall down your hallway. To the right, now I may take my right foot and place it forward, so as I lean to the right around that position to cover or barricade for you competition shooters, now I balance in that direction, meaning the body weight is now on the right side of my body, so the right foot is forward. So when we talk about the lower body structure, it's critical that you do this. I took a class actually with Travis Tomasi, a good buddy of mine, been shooting with him for years and years and years. And when I watched him talk about structure, teach structure, I was amazed to find there were so many things that he and I do the same. And one of the things that I learned long ago was the importance of my lower body position. Remember, not just for balance purposes, but also so I have the ability to move the gun very, very quickly from one target to the next target, called a transition or an acquisition. So for you competitive shooters, I can't tell you how important that particular part of the structure is, okay? And we'll talk about the grip here in just a second. Hey, who else do we have on here? By the way, I see Mr. Will Parker on. Good morning, Will Parker. Will says, structure, 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 of course. We had a conversation the other day. Will is one of my members and instructors, and he was talking about the importance of teaching that to his students and how when he got the structure across properly, it took them to the next level as far as shooting. Hey, Brian Schuler, good morning. How are you from North Texas? Good morning, Brian. Brian, share with all your Texas folks down there. Tell them to get on the live stream. Jesse Perez, how are you, sir? Coin number 2222. Jesse, I did not know you were coin number 2222. That's pretty wild. That's incredible. Tina is on. Good morning. You share with girls and of the Low Country. Good morning, girls of the Low Country. We have 49 live viewers on. My goal is to hit 100, so click the share button if you haven't done that. All right, let's talk about structure up the body. So and by the way, if you have a question, please throw it up there in the comments. And if I missed your question, don't forget that the screen is such when I'm looking at you, I'm staring directly at you. I've got to stop looking at you for a moment in time to look at the screen to read the comments. So if I'm looking at you and teaching something, I may miss your question. Just throw it back up there. No big deal. We'll get to that question. So from the bottom up, and I want to get to the grip and the trigger and sights quickly. So I want to talk about the last portion of structure. My body weight is on the balls of my feet. I had a question about that from the student the other day. My knees are slightly bent. My hips are generally going to be square to the target, right? Now, let me tell you about a critical thing that I see students making a mistake on a regular basis, and that is the upper body position. So if I turn sideways for you, right, and I stand upright, you're going to notice that my shoulder is over my hips, right? Now, if my shoulder, and if my hand is my shoulder at the top and my hips are at the bottom, recoil travels in this direction. So if recoil is pushing my body this direction and I'm directly upright, the recoil will have the advantage against me. So when you're shooting, your upper body angle is a critical part of your structure. And here's the reason I tell you about it. I tell you about it because I have seen so many of my students being pushed to the rear with a handgun. And some of you guys watching this right now, you big, strong guys, you're going, not me, Mike. There's no way that handgun's going to push me to the rear. Guess what, big, strong guys? I watch handguns in a 5-shot pace drill, for example, push the upper body or the shoulders back 2 inches. I've watched it on extremely good shooters. So your upper body angle is critical. So if I take my handgun and I get into my perfect stance, I want you to pay attention to my upper body angle and notice that my shoulders are forward of my hips. And when I get my shoulders forward of my hips, I counterbalance. So there's a little secret tip for you that could potentially dramatically increase your recoil control. Understand that the faster I shoot the handgun, boom, 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 the more the gun tends to push me upright. And by the way, that is the CoolFire trainer in action. It allows me to get felt recoil. It allows me to reset the trigger and do all of this things that I would normally do on a live fire range. No, I did not put holes in the wall over there. CoolFire trainer. Love this thing, by the way. So watch your upper body position, okay? So let's segue into the strong hand. And here's the tip of the day for you. Your strong hand, when it makes contact with the handgun, is what I call index point 1, right? So when I'm driving my hand up the back strap of the handgun, I'm paying attention, and you should pay attention to this little secret. I'm paying attention to that contact point. I can literally feel where the tang of the firearm, the beaver tail, the tang of the grip, or whatever else, call it what you want, is making contact with the web of my hand. But I'm also taking that strong hand and I'm driving it up the back strap of the gun aggressively. So when I have my full strong hand grip, and here's a tip for you, if you're doing this with me, grab your handgun, make sure it's unloaded and safe, of course. When you grab your handgun, you should feel pressure between the middle knuckle of your middle finger and the trigger guard, and you should feel pressure between the tang of the firearm and the web of the hand. If you do that, you probably have a good, high, strong hand grip. Now, the other thing I'm doing with the strong hand, and I'll get your questions here in just a second if you have one. If you have a question about the strong hand grip, throw it up there, is I'm flagging the thumb up in the air, right? The reason we're flagging the thumb is that's going to give us space to get the second hand into position. So if you were to ask me, Mike, well, what is the most common thing you see in your classes that is not perfect in terms of structure? Beyond the lower body, which we've talked about, the feet width, the balance, et cetera, to the upper body angle, I see strong hand grips that are too low on the handgun. They're like this. They're like, it's kind of a hope grip. I hope I have a good grip on the handgun. You know, I hope I can control the recoil versus I'm going to bear down on the handgun, put my hands in the right spot, and then control that recoil of the firearm. Okay? If you have a question, by the way, throw it up there and we will reply. Hey, Doug Wellington, good morning. How are you this morning? Gilly Jackson's on. Good morning. Doug Grigg, you liked it and shared it. Hey, how many people we have on? We have 51 people on. Come on, Facebook. I know people are sharing in groups. I know they're loving this right now. Hey, who has hit the like button? If you haven't hit like, I think maybe Facebook doesn't want us to share. I'm not sure. But click the like button a couple times, and typically that will get us in front of more viewers. I know I'm live on 3 Facebook pages, so I find it hard to believe that we don't have 100 million viewers right now. Good morning, Steve Bedell. I see you on as well. Alan Kelly, you slightly bend at the waist. I certainly do. And I don't see anything else as far as questions pop up. So we talked about the strong hand. Let me talk about the support hand key. Now, I said it's critically important that we flag this strong hand thumb, right? It's critically important that this thumb is up and out of the way, but not so far out of the way that I lose contact with the grip. But it is up in the air, so when I make contact with the trigger guard and build my support hand grip, I can get my left hand into position to put pressure, and here's a key pressure point for you, on the back of the gun. And you heard me say it, don't misunderstand me. On the back of the gun is the most important spot for me to put pressure on a handgun. So if you want to shoot fast and accurately, you have to have your hands in the right place on the handgun, and you have to apply the right pressure if the hands are in the right place. If you have the hands in the wrong place, you can't apply the pressure. You understand where I'm going with this? So the point is, with my support hand, I have indexed, some folks will remember this from the old DDC days, as what's this called? By the way, type this in the comments. I'm not going to give you the name. I'll call it the official name, the trigger guard index point. What is the name that I normally call it, though? You know what I'm talking about. So I'm going to index in the trigger guard, and then that hand is not going to come just back on the grip itself, but it's going to come back and up into position. So now I have a nice, high, firm grip on the handgun, which will facilitate me gripping and controlling the recoil as good as I possibly can. Remember, your job with your structure is to apply leverage and force against the handgun. So when it recoils, we minimize the recoil path, we maximize the return, and we're ready to shoot again, okay? Oh, look at everybody talking about the Judy chop. Who heard that term? Where did Judy chop come from? Who made that up? I made it up, by the way. I think I made it up. Actually, I sort of copied it off something else that was funny. I'm not going to tell you where the term came from. You got to Google it and figure out if you can find where it came from. All right, folks. A lot of folks on. If you have a question about the strongest support hand, please throw it up there and like and share. What do we have on right now? 64. Okay, I'm getting excited. We're like, what is that? 36? I had to do the math in my head. Sorry, I'm not very fast with math. We're 36 people away from hitting 100. We're so close. Come on. I know we can do this. Someone share it on Instagram. Someone go to Instagram and say, hey, these guys are live over there. It's pretty. We need one of our influencers. Who's a big influencer that has like 1 million followers? Someone tell Joe Rogan to share this right now, and we'll hit at least 100, okay? All right, so we talked about grip, the structure with the strong hand, the support hand. I want to talk about trigger real quickly, and I want to talk about trigger as it relates to the double action trigger pull. This particular firearm, Beretta 92 style firearm, is a double action first shot gun, right? So the first shot is double action, and then every shot thereafter is, what we would call single action. Now, if I were to shoot a Glock 19, once again, this one is converted with a Coolfire trainer as well. This is a striker fired system, which means that there's a striker in the slide that is semi-tensioned right now. And when I pull the trigger, the striker is pulled to the rear, and then it's released and the gun actually fires, right? Very similar to the M&P Shield or maybe the 320 variant that I have on the table that is a CERT type demonstration tool. But the bottom line is it's the same mechanism. Now, when we're talking about trigger, there are two trigger styles of manipulation I talk about. One is what I call the accelerated pull, or an accelerated pull is where we accelerate directly through the trigger. So if you watch my trigger finger, I'm literally going to pull straight through the trigger. That's comparatively speaking compared to a control pull. So a control pull, watch my finger, is where I take the slack out of the trigger, I prep the trigger, and then I fire the shot from that position. So here's the question for you, and if you know the answer, I want you to type it in the comments. I know some of my FIDC candidates, those of you that have been through my FIDC will know the answer to this. Why do we prep the trigger? And then I'm going to talk to you about a couple other things as well. I'm going to talk to you about trigger finger positioning, secrets and stuff. Why do we prep the trigger? Because there's a reason I prep the trigger on the handgun. I'm not just prepping it to feel the wall, for example. Why do we prep the trigger? Okay. Now, while I'm waiting on you to answer that, here's the deal. Here's a question for you. Second question. Does our trigger finger position where the finger literally makes contact with the trigger matter? Meaning, there are some schools of thought that say, Mike, well, we should pull the trigger with the tip of our finger. And there's some people that say, well, no, we should pull the trigger deeper on the trigger, maybe near the first joint bend, right? Or maybe somewhere in between. And here's my general rule for me that is not a rule for everybody. My general rule is my trigger finger contact point is about the center of where my fingerprint swirl is. So if you look at your fingerprint on the first pad, the swirl, the center, that's where my finger's making contact. But here's the why behind that, right? We always got to think about the why behind the what. Here's the what, but here's the why behind the what, right? Think about that for a second. The why is if I make contact with my finger length on the right spot on the trigger, then when I am applying pressure to the trigger, I'm applying pressure directly on the front face of the trigger. What I don't want to do is apply pressure on the left or the right side of the trigger because I may influence the gun and push the gun in that direction. So depending on your finger length, and my good buddy Rob Latham has very short fingers, so his trigger finger position is a different place than mine. My trigger finger facilitates a fast or accelerated pull if I need that, straight to the rear, so I don't push the gun left or pull the gun right. So there's your trigger finger tip. By the way, let's see what we have here. Oh, that's right. Alan Kelly from the DDC. You're exactly right. And Doug Grigg says, the redneck ninja, you're right. You're letting the cat out of the box. You're supposed to make people search for that and find it out. Hello, Akeen. I see you on. Good morning. Where you place your finger depends on the shot. Akeen, I'm going to be honest with you. Maybe I tend to put my finger on the trigger in the same spot for all handgun trigger pulls. I may very well put my finger in a different spot when I'm pulling the trigger on the rifle. But generally speaking, for a very accurate shot or a very fast shot, I'm going to put my trigger finger on the same position, right? But when you're working this kind of stuff, if you have a Coolfire trainer, you can work from that index point, that Judy shot position, and you can practice building your grip, aiming the handgun, and firing the shot, right? And by the way, I asked the question earlier, why do we prep the trigger? The answer, if you didn't get that in the comments, is because we're still aiming the handgun. If we still have to aim the handgun, meaning verify the alignment, well, then we're going to do something while we're using that time, and we might as well prep the trigger, because prepping the trigger makes the trigger easier to pull because we've taken some of the weight out and we decrease the distance of the trigger pull. which means it's going to be easier trigger pull, which is going to make our shot more accurate, okay? Mike Adams Jr. says, pad of the finger contact point makes a difference. Biggest reason most people hit left or right a point of impact. Yes, and by the way, let me add to that, Mike, in terms of your comment. I think the biggest reason that people hit a place that they don't want to hit is probably not trigger finger positioning, although that adds to it. It's what they're doing with these 3 supporting fingers. And here's the deal. I'm going to say this officially on my Facebook Live, where we have 51 live viewers. Man, I thought we'd have like 99 on by now. Come on, folks. What is going on there? Facebook, you're not helping me out here. Facebook, share my live stream. But let me get back to my point before I get off track. When you're doing this, I want you to consider this. People talk about trigger control all the time. Hey, why did he miss the shot, right? He missed the shot because he jerked the trigger. Well, I'm going to submit to you this. I'm going to submit to you a little tip. When I fire the gun, I can jerk the trigger incredibly hard. I can jerk the trigger all day long. Yes, I'm saying it live for the record. I can jerk the trigger and hit the shot if I don't move the gun. Let me switch up to a SIRT type pistol. By the way, the SIRT is kind of interesting in that when I pull the trigger initially, it's a demonstration tool, by the way. It has a little laser, right? Not sure if you can see that on the camera itself. And then when I press the trigger, it has a second laser, right? So when I'm doing this, if you were to look at the gun itself in a good grip, and if I have the trigger prepped, you can probably see the laser on the front of the muzzle, right? When I pull the trigger, if I pull the trigger and move my supporting fingers, right? These fingers, I will move the gun. So when we talk about trigger control, your trigger control is often not the problem when you're missing shots. Everybody thinks it is. And here's something I want you to remember. Good trigger control is good grip control. And this is the tip of the day for you. That means that I'm going to grip with my 3 supporting fingers first. So I'm gripping hard here. Then I would manipulate the trigger and pull the trigger to the rear. I'm not gripping and pulling at the same time. I'm gripping and then pulling and not moving the gun. So when everybody says, well, you missed the shot because you had a bad trigger control, or you missed the shot because you jerked the trigger, I would submit to you, you missed the shot because you moved the gun. So if you learn how to pull the trigger without moving the gun, that is in effect the key. So if you have a question about trigger control, throw it up there. Let me see what I have up there. Oh, Jesse says the target would help viewers see the lasers. Well, Jesse, a little secret for you is right now the target is a big garage door looking thing behind the camera, but we will, and we're adding cameras. I have, how many cameras do I have in here, guys? I got a big support group. I got 4 cameras right now. So we're always playing with different angles here in the studio and what we can show you during a live stream. So we could cut from, for example, that camera to that camera to, I don't think that camera's active. And then we got a little slider camera. You've probably seen, looks like I'm moving back and forth, or the studio's moving. That's actually the camera moving, right? Kind of a slider camera, but we will be showing that in the near future, okay? If you have a question, by the way, throw it up there and I will answer your question. And I want to talk about one last thing, and that is sights. So we talked about the grip, building the structure from the ground up. We talked about trigger control. And now I want to talk to you about sights and the aiming process. Now here's the deal with sights. Sights are much like the trigger control is to a lot of shooters, right? Especially newer shooters. Newer shooters will oftentimes think that they missed the shot because of trigger control. The second thing that they oftentimes say is, I missed the shot because I didn't aim good enough. Well, the reality is, if you think about this, why do we ever miss? Why do we miss a shot that we intended to hit? It's got to be one of a few things. Number one, the gun is not zeroed or sighted in, right? The optic or the sights are not good, meaning when you're aiming the handgun and doing everything perfectly, the sights are off, so the shot is off. Maybe that's number one. Number two, you were not truly aiming at the right spot. What did who was the guy on the show, the famous show, and he said, aim small, miss small. Everybody likes to say it in the range. Aim small, miss small, meaning aim at a small spot in the target and you're going to miss smaller. Well, that also relates to aiming in the right spot. You know, oftentimes when I'm doing training with students and they're shooting a target over and over again, they start to have a group on the target. Now, if they're making a mistake, maybe their sights are off or maybe their gun is moving and that group starts to go left or low left on the target, then they tend to start to aim for the group. So be aware of where you're aiming. So number one, the sights are off. Number two, we're not aiming in the right spot. Or number three, we move the gun before the bullet left the barrel, right? So that's it. When we talk about that though, let's talk about sights. In terms of an iron-sighted pistol, what do I have to do to hit a shot? Well, some of you may say, Mike, I need to focus on the front sight. Focus on the front sight. Matter of fact, my generation of instructors said, hey guys, if you want to hit the target, focus on the front sight, front sight, front sight. That's all we said was front sight, front sight, front sight. And then we have a student that's doing this, and the muzzle's high. And I'm exaggerating this for the camera, but the point is, my muzzle's high, but I'm looking at the front sight, sir. You said front sight, I'm looking at the front sight. Well, that's not going to get it. Remember, the front sight has to have a relationship with the rear sight. And the front and rear sight have to have a relationship with the target. But here's a question for you. Here's a trivia question of the day, and I want you to type in the comments and answer. How much alignment do you need to have, right? So if the front sight is in the rear sight with this handgun, how much alignment do we need to have in order to hit a given shot, right? Let's say it's a 7-yard shot, and we're trying to hit a 0 zone in an IDPA target or the A zone in a USPSA target. How much alignment do we need, right? That's a question for you. Because if we can answer that question, then we know what we need to look for in our training drills. And if we know what we need to look for in our training drills, then we can do repetitions over and over again and look for those things, which eventually will ingrain that visual and mental processing, right? So we can repeat it automatically at the subconscious level. That's what true training and practice actually should be. By the way, thank you, by the way, Family Firearms Reviews. Mel Gibson in The Patriot. That's right, aim small. It was Mel Gibson. I knew it was Mel Gibson. I had his picture in my mind. Hey, Chris Edmondson. Good morning, sir. How are you? Vincent Crow. I haven't seen Vincent on for a long time. Good morning, Vincent. Which hand is providing the greatest grip pressure on the handgun? Vincent, that is a fantastic question, and you caught me. I didn't talk a lot about grip pressure. So in terms of Vincent's question, my hands are gripping the handgun very hard, but I would describe my pressure as nearly equal. Some of you may go, well, Mike, what about the 60-40 grip percentages? 60% with your support hand, 40% with your strong hand, or whatever else. Or if you overgrip the handgun with your strong hand, you'll have trigger freeze, which I don't agree with, by the way. My point, though, is when my brain doesn't know what 60 and 40 is, but it knows what grip the gun really hard is with two hands, and more importantly, the direction of the pressure. And here's a little secret for you. When I'm gripping the gun, I'm crushing the back of the gun. So I'm taking my hands and I've locked them together. They're in the right place on the handgun, and I am clamping my palms together and pushing them on the back of the gun. At full extension, in answer to your question, I'm gripping the gun as hard as I can without a tremor or a shake. So if I grab the handgun and I gripped it literally as hard as I could, there may be a point where I start to tremor or shake. I might be gripping a little too hard. But for 99% of you, over gripping the handgun is not going to be a problem. A huge percentage of the students that I teach under grip the handgun. They do not grip the gun hard enough. So there's your tip, grip the gun really, really hard. All right, let's see what else I have as far as questions. I don't see anything else popping up. So let me answer the question on the aiming process. How much alignment do we need to have to hit a 0 zone target or an A zone target at that 7-yard distance? And what you're going to find is if my front sight is literally all the way to the left or to the right inside the rear sight notch, maybe even half of my front sight that is behind the rear sight, meaning my misalignment is so bad, my front sight is all the way to the left or to the right, and I can only see half of it. You will still hit the edge of the 0 area or the A zone area if you fire a shot without moving the gun, right? The front sight can be almost all the way out of the rear sight notch, right? Or buried deep inside the rear sight notch. By the way, go do this live fire the next time you go to the range, okay? We'll show you a video next time we pop up here. And I will still nearly hit the 0 zone, and I will hit the A zone because the A zone is longer on a target for those of you that compete, okay? So you don't need as much alignment as you think you need. And you need to learn that, for example, the drill that we just put up this week for this week's programming, which was point, flash, focus. And the concept is, with the 5-yard target, a 10-yard target, and a 20-yard target is, what do I need to do to aim the handgun at the 5-yard target? Is it different than what I need to aim at the 10-yard target and the 20-yard target? And I will tell you that those 3 different distances represent what we need to do on the sights, both the alignment of the front and rear sight, or the stabilization of the dot with an optic. We'll talk about that next. Better than any drill I've ever done. So for me, if I had a 5-yard target, a 10-yard target, and a 20-yard target, on the 5-yard target, I would literally be pointing the gun, much like you point your finger at me. So if you take your finger right now at the screen and point it right at me, you know exactly where your finger is, right? The slide of the handgun is much like the finger, right? So I'm literally pointing the finger directly at the target. I don't take the time to visually process and look for the front sight and align it in the rear sight. And here's the question: why not? Why don't I do that, right? And the simple answer is because it takes too much time. I don't need that at 5 yards. I can point the gun, and I didn't say not see alignment, and I didn't say I was point shooting, so don't misinterpret me and put that out there, but I can hit the target without taking the time to look at the front sight in the rear sight notch. Now, on the 10-yard target, I'm getting that flash sight picture. I don't know if Cooper originally came up with that term, but that's where I heard it first. And I like it. It's a truism. I like it. It's a statement, I think, that represents what we're actually doing. We're getting a very quick flash sight picture of the front sight somewhere near the rear sight notch, and that's enough to hit the shot, assuming we don't move the gun. And then the 20-yard target requires what I call a focus. So I'm taking the handgun, I'm aligning the sights, and I'm actually looking visually at the front sight. And that allows me to determine if it's aligned in the rear sight notch, right? So point, flash, focus. And those, in words, best describe what I'm doing on the target itself. All right, man. Hey, we have 60 live viewers. We went back up. I wonder what the highest number we have had on. I wonder if we hit 70s today. I sure wish we would have. Brian asks, how do we control our mental process that causes our groups to spread exponentially at longer distances? Brian, you keep working on shooting and become a better shooter. Here's the deal. Your group size is relevant, right? It's always dictated by the distance we are from the target and the speed we're shooting. Because the distance we are from the target exponentially increases, your standard deviation, meaning we're all moving the gun all the time. If you start to shoot at 50 yards, at 60 yards, at 70 yards, the difficulty is not necessarily aiming, but it's holding the gun still, right? So we're talking about shooting faster or at farther distances, those group sizes are always going to increase, which means we need to figure out how to improve both our hold as well as our visual decision-making process on, is this enough alignment or not? Right? With an iron-sighted handgun, for example. Okay? Brandon asks, is it dependent on equipment like sight radius, width, and height of the blade and notch? Brandon, if you're asking about the being able to hit the A zone at 7 yards with the misalignment I'm talking about, to an extent, it would matter which sight size you have. But if you try this, what you'll find is you can bury the front sight in the rear sight notch, left, right, up, or down, and it's not really dictated by the size of the sights necessarily, and you will still hit probably in a zero zone shot for most cases, because as you know, the zero zone is wider than the A zone is. But for the rest of those shots, you will be on the AC edge or very, very close to the AC zone as well. As far as height, you can have the front sight almost all the way out of the notch and still hit an A zone, right? Because the A zone is longer up and down, assuming you're aiming at the center of the A zone, if that makes sense, okay? So John Watson talks about follow-through, and let's talk about follow-through real quickly. We talk about follow-through all the time. I hear that term so much in the marksmanship circles. You know what my follow-through is? I'll show you my follow-through. This is my follow-through. I fire the shot, I reset the trigger, right? So my follow-through is the process of firing and resetting the trigger for the next shot. Meaning I'm never firing the shot and going, I'm following through, waiting for something to happen, because there is no true follow-through on the handgun. Because once we fire the shot, watch the slide cycle. When the slide cycles, the bullet's already gone. It was gone several hundredths before that actually happens. The bullet, if you watch this in slow motion, if you do a super slow motion camera, what happens is you see the hammer fall, boom, and then all of a sudden you see some smoke appear or whatever else, and then there's some ignition, and the bullet flies out of the barrel, and then the slide unlocks and starts to travel to the rear, cycling and feeding the next bullet. So there's no true follow through with a handgun. Us standing there waiting for something to happen by firing a shot and following through and waiting is simply a waste of time. So the true follow-through process with the handgun is fire your shot, get ready to fire the shot again. So notice I re-prep the trigger pretty much instantaneously when I fire that shot. And by the way, for those of you that have been pinning the trigger your entire life, let me demonstrate this a little different. I'll use this trigger position. This particular device shows both the prep laser, which you could probably see on the camera, and the press laser, right? So when I fire a shot, every time I stop the gun on target, I'm prepping the trigger, if it requires, and that's most shots that are somewhat difficult. The second I fire that shot, though, when I press the trigger, I'm immediately going to go right back to the prep point, right? So if you watch these lasers, I won't aim directly at the camera. There's the prep laser. So I prep the trigger. I realize the sights tell me the shot is good enough. I'm going to fire the shot, and I'm immediately going to re-prep the trigger. I'm not going to fire the shot and then hold the trigger to the rear and then slowly reset to the click, right? I'm going to fire that shot and re-prep the trigger. So there's the prep laser, reset the trigger, just like that. Because if we're waiting for something else, we're simply wasting time. I want to get off the trigger and as quickly as possible while I maintain the exact same grip pressure and get ready to fire again, okay? All right, let's see what I have as far as questions, folks. 8:15, just a few more minutes for Q&A, and then we'll talk about optics real quick, and then we'll go from there. So Akin, you're running your Glock clone with no front post around 4 to 7 yards. I would expect you to do well at 4 to 7 yards. I wouldn't expect you to need a front sight whatsoever at that distance. Remember, and I hesitate to say the word point shooting, but you know, someone asked me, are we point shooting when we're shooting? Well, we're always point shooting. What we should be asking is, do we visually look at the sights and or need to look at the sights? And if so, how much alignment do we need on the sights? And Akin is talking about shooting at 4 yards. You could knock the front sight off your handgun. You're still verifying some alignment, meaning you're verifying the alignment by looking at the slide. Like you take your finger and point it right at me, I'm pointing at the camera. I could tell if the finger's aligned or misaligned up or down, okay? Gilly says that we can only reach the 700 plus viewers. For those of you that don't know, we actually did a live stream many years ago, and the live stream went from 100 viewers to 200 viewers to 300 viewers. And by the time it hit 400 to 500 live viewers, I was losing my mind, and it actually hit 700 live viewers, and then the live stream stopped. I think the Facebook computers or something said, hey, we got to get this guy off here. This is kind of crazy, okay? Pat Cahill, defensive accuracy versus marksmanship. You know, Pat, I don't know. I don't know exactly how to answer that question because it's not specific. But if you're asking if there's a difference between defensive accuracy and marksmanship, for me, I put that into the same bowl, if you will, right? So what I'm talking about is, in a defensive encounter, what do I require? I require a hit that is going to stop the threat. That's probably for most shots, if I have the available target, going to be high center chest on a human, right? That's going to give me the most bang for the buck, right? Potentially, it might be a smaller target, like we've heard of some recent shootings where actually a headshot was required, or some longer distance shootings. But the accuracy requirement is accuracy requirement. Doesn't, to me, matter if it's in a defensive encounter or at a USPSA match. Whatever you are trying to hit has a certain level of accuracy required. Meaning, I don't say, well, for competition, I shoot all these hard shots, and then for defensive, I'm just going to shoot generally at them because I know the distance is going to be close, and I'm not going to make those assumptions. If you tell me I have to hit a 1-yard target, that's going to take something different than if you say, Mike, for some reason, you have to hit a 40-yard target today. Whether that's in a match or when I leave here today, when I leave the LiveFire studio and go to lunch and bad things happen and there's a guy that is trying to hurt me or my family member or someone else that's 32 yards away, well, then that's what it requires. So for me, I don't say, well, that's combat accuracy. That's fundamental marksmanship accuracy. Accuracy is accuracy, right? If a 3-yard target is required to be hit for whatever reason, then I'm going to hit it using a certain set of mechanics and principles versus a 33-yard target. I'm going to use a certain set of mechanical principles to that. So it's still the alignment of the gun, and verification of the alignment is what matters to me, okay? Let's see what else I have on. I don't see any other questions. Oh, last but not least, let's talk real briefly about the good old optics. And the reason I want to talk about this is because in my classes recently, I'm literally getting 60% plus of my students showing up with an optic on a handgun. So how do we aim an optic? Does an optic change the game in terms of the aiming process? And I will submit to you, it 100% does. So if my visual focus with an iron-sighted handgun, or I have a front and rear sight, is a 3-focal plane focus, I have the front sight to be aware of, and the rear sight to be aware of, and the target that I'm aiming at. Generally speaking, as the accuracy requirement increases, the more my focal point is going to be on the front sight, so I can compare it and contrast it to the rear sight. And I'll give you some tips on that here in a second. With an optic, however, I am always going to be target focused. So if I'm trying to hit the small screw right over there on the wall, I am looking precisely at that screw, and I'm centering the screw in the window of the optic, and then I'm putting the dot directly on the screw without ever bringing my focus point back to the dot. Now, you may say, well, Mike, you can see the dot, so you're looking at the dot. Technically, I'm looking through the dot, through the window at the target. Remember, for those of you that are kind of new to optics, the optic is a pretty simple system. There's a small diode that's projecting that little dot kind of laser image up on the glass or the window of the optic, right? And when I see that, I can see it as if I'm looking directly at it. It looks very clear to me right now. This has a very crisp, clear dot, but I am looking downrange at my target. So when you're shooting that optic, I am always looking at the target versus the dot itself. And when I fire those shots, I maintain that focus. And that's the beauty of the optic. The optic is a single focal plane system. So it allows me to focus directly downrange at the target itself. Now, how do I mitigate, for example, the 5-yard target, the 10-yard target, and the 20-yard target? Well, for me, with the optic, at the 5-yard target, I'm pointing and I'm getting the target in the window. So when I say the window, I'm talking about the window of the optic. At the 10-yard target, the target is in the window, but the dot is in the right place, but I can accept some movement of the dot. And on the 20-yard target, the target is in the window, and the dot has to stop moving like this, and it has to settle enough for me to fire the shot. So where with the iron-sighted gun, I'm changing the different levels of focus on the sights themselves, right? With an optic, I'm still looking at the exact same thing. The only difference is my awareness of what the dot does and what I make the gun do via the dot. Meaning the dot is moving around a lot, okay? And in this particular case, I'm going to stop the motion of the dot to hit that A-zone shot. or the zero zone shot on an IDPA target at 20 yards, if that makes sense, okay? All right, folks, we have 59 viewers. We hit 60 some, almost 70. We didn't hit my goal of 100, but maybe we'll in a future live stream. Let me see what else I have on it. So John talking about follow the process, they yank the trigger. Yes, you are exactly right. So John's point is, when we're talking about follow through, it's a process of maintaining the alignment of the gun. Right, what do you have to, here's what you have to do. Maybe I should ask this formal question. What do you have to do to hit any given target? Think about that for a second. What do you have to do to hit any given target, right? Well, you need to bring the gun to bear on the target, right? So I need to start to create alignment, okay? Verify alignment, right? Then I need to establish the stationary position. And the harder the shot is, the more I need to stop the gun moving. And then I need to be able to fire the shot without moving the gun. That's it. All I have to do is I have to find the targets. I have to bring the gun to the target. I have to create and verify alignment. And then I have to fire the gun without moving it. That's all you have to do. The harder the shot is, the more alignment we have to verify, and the more we have to pay attention to not moving the firearm. But the point is, it doesn't change in any circumstance. Those are the things we have to do. So in John's point on follow through, if we've moved the gun before the bullet exits the barrel, we're not going to hit the shot we want to hit, okay? Doug Grigg, is it okay to have your trigger finger laying against the frame of the gun in order to reach the trigger properly? So, Doug, I think your question is, when you're talking about the frame of the gun, meaning, can I contact the frame of the gun with the inside part of my trigger finger? Like, I guess that would be like my trigger finger bicep, right? Maybe we talking about that? So the answer is, I will generally, if you can look at this, I'm going to give you a different view. I will generally like to have a little bit of a gap between my finger and the frame of the gun. But in the example, I use my buddy Rob as the example again. If you have really, really short fingers, the only option you may have is to have the finger in the trigger guard so deeply that you have contact between the frame and the finger. And the reality is, in that particular case, I want to make sure when I'm pulling the trigger, I'm not moving the trigger finger in this direction. I want to move the trigger finger in this direction. If I move the trigger finger in this direction, notice that the first joint of my finger is isolated, and I'm not going to be pushing on the side of the gun. So, is it optimum, Doug? No, but you may have to do it based on your trigger finger length, okay? Carrying a pistol with iron sight. Ooh, good question. Is it Evgeny Lance? Is that your name? I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it. That is a wild name. How would I recommend training? Well, so here's the deal. If you have to teach someone to go from iron sights to an optic, the first thing you're going to have to get across to them is the visual focus point changes from probably a front sight focus to a target focus. If they can't do a true target focus and they need to probably keep both eyes open, there's no reason not to have both eyes open. With an optic, well, you can do a lot of different things. You can cover the non-dominant eye just to get them in that habit. And you can also cover the optic and make them keep both eyes open. Matter of fact, that's one of the tricks of these days with a optic transition is to cover the optic itself, meaning the front window of the optic. It's called an occluded optic, and that allows you to still see the dot in the optic, but you have to keep both eyes open in order to see the target and the optic. But I would start with number one, teaching them to look at the target. So I would draw a little mark on the target itself, maybe a little square, and then I would have them go through a process of slowly but surely presenting the optic in a manner where they center the target in the center of the window. So I'll use the camera as the example. So when I present the handgun, I'm going to center the camera in the center of the window, and I'm going to find the dot, right? So I'm going to center the camera in the center of the window, and I'm going to find the dot. Now the dot right now is directly on the camera lens, but I'm starting the process by extending the handgun and working my presentation, and this is a learned position, so the camera is directly in the center of the window, and the dot will fall exactly where it should, okay? Run out of gas for my Cool Fire trainer. So I would do those two things, get them to look at the target, and then have them work on that presentation. And by the way, the presentation, it may be dozens to hundreds to thousands of reps. It's a learned position. I hate to say it, there's no secret to finding a dot quick. It's learning to present the handgun like you always do and doing it over and over and over again until you can find that dot, okay? Gilly asked, do I prefer iron sights or optics? I don't really prefer either. Like, I've been shooting a lot more iron sights lately because that's where I'm going to compete. I teach with so many different groups and entities that I have to be good with both. But I could tell you at my age, with these older eyes, the dot is really hard to ignore because I don't have to have any correction. Like right now, at my age, I can't focus as clearly on the front sight as I need to for a hard shot. And I'm not telling you, by the way, you have to focus on the front sight. A large majority of my iron-sighted shooting is target focused, right? I'm not front sight focused. But the dot makes things so easy. I have to say that if I have a preference, I'd probably be shooting a dot, okay? And Pat says, as you get older, bifocals, see the sights of the optics or the answer. Condition optics. Optics, they do present problems. If you're going, I always tell folks, if you're going to carry, we talked about this in last week's live show, with an optic, you have to accept a lot of different things. It requires as much or more training than the iron sights. It requires the dedication of the optic, making sure that it's tight on the gun, you're verifying your set screws, the battery's changed out, the optic lens is clean. You may consider a closed optic versus an open optic, closed emitter optic versus an open emitter optic, which are becoming more and more popular. But it presents a lot of things, believe it or not, for the average defensive handgunner that iron sights don't present. Okay. Ed asked, do I switch between optics and iron just to keep both skilled? Yes. So I'll give you a couple more tips on that, Ed, as well. Optics, the dot on the optic translates more gun movement than the iron sights allow you to visually see. So like, for example, I'll give you a great example. Yesterday in my practice session, I worked iron sights for about 3/4 of the session. Then I switched over to an identical gun with an optic on it, and I ran those same movement drills. And the optic translates the movement of my body and the movement of the gun so much more vividly that it allows me to see my mistakes better. I will tell you that shooting an identical optic-sighted handgun will make you a smoother and better iron-sighted shooter. Certainly that's more for you competitors out there, but it's applicable in the defensive environment as well. So be aware of that. So I switch back and forth. And understand though, Ed, I teach with so many different people and so many different entities and groups and compete in several divisions. I'm always rotating through the different sighting methods and sighting type systems, okay? All right, do we have anything else up there as far as questions? I don't think anything else. Man, 8:30, 1 hour. I am kind of long-winded. Normally these things take like 30 to 40 minutes, but these are great questions, folks. Hopefully you got some stuff in. So we covered a lot of things today. We talked about, the grip mechanics from the ground up, building a proper structure. We talked about the hips and the shoulder relationship, your upper body angle. We talked about gripping the gun with the strong hand, nice and high, pressure between the middle of the finger and web of the hand. We talked about indexing and building that support hand grip. We talked about the key pressure areas that I'm using to control the recoil of the handgun. I'm gripping the gun and I'm squeezing the back of the gun with the palms of my hands, and then everything else is locked down. We talked about the pressure mounts. For me, it's about 50-50, or maybe I should say it like this. I'm gripping really hard with both hands, as pretty much as hard as I can without shaking, folks, right? We talked about the trigger. We talked about the accelerated pull and the controlled pull, prepping the trigger or just accelerating right through it, and why we prep the trigger. Remember, we prep the trigger. We take the slack out because we're still aligning or fighting for alignment of the handgun. If we weren't doing that, if the shot was easy enough, the gun's aligned, we would just press the trigger, right? So that's why we prep the trigger. And then, of course, last but not least, we talked about some trigger finger positional secrets, and we talked about applying that to your sight management method. So we talked about the iron sights and the optics and the difference between the two. Don't forget, if you are on LiveFire, this week's programming is up. I put a specific drill to work grip trigger sights, right? It's called point, flash, focus. It's a single shot drill. It's super easy to do, and I want to see you find that drill, click run drill, and log your times and results. I want to see how fast you can build a good grip, present the handgun to that 5-yard target, or 10-yard target or 20-yard target, and then log those results. If you want to check it out or check my logs out, you can do that on LiveFire as well. I know we put a QR code up. Scan that, jump on LiveFire. If you follow me, send me a message. I'll follow you back and be able to answer your questions, folks. That's all I have. Next week's live stream, next Tuesday morning at 7:30, unless we change it up. And by the way, if you have feedback on when we're doing this, if you much prefer the Wednesday morning sessions or maybe Wednesday evenings, how about that? Then the crew doesn't have to get up as early. My conscious doesn't have to be in the booth and setting up like an hour ahead of time, right? If you prefer a different time frame, type in the day and the time. Hey, Mike, man, I'd love for you to go live on this day and time. Let us know, okay? Get out and work those drills. You don't get skill without doing drills repetitively, and you got to do them perfectly. So that's your reminder of today, okay? Oh, Ty, you missed the whole thing. I'm sorry about that. Chris, thank you so much. IDPA was in the house. We'll be on IDPA next week as well. Gilly, last question. Optic iron sights first, then optics later? Maybe. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think the ability to shoot iron sights is a harder skill to have. But I will tell you this, for new shooters, an optic shows the movement of the gun. So if I have a new shooter with iron sights that's having a problem, oftentimes I'll give them an optic to visually show them the motion or movement of the gun. And that actually helps them solve that problem, okay? Doug, you say 5:30 a.m. sort of sucks. Okay, Doug, then maybe we do afternoon, man. Nice to see you. Doug Wellington and Doug Rigg. Doug Wellington, 5:30 a.m. Come on, man. Just kidding. All right. Thanks, folks. That's all I have. Get out and work those skills. Stay safe. And until then, train hard.